Hello, and welcome back to the next part of this White Album 2 Doujinshi Rainy Days and Mondays. So, this is post Setsuna coda route. I hope you listened to the first part first, so you probably know this, but just as a quick recap. Post Setsuna coda route, Setsuna and Haruki are about to get married, and they are on a date at an art museum. And Haruki's kind of wondering, why are you enjoying this so much? Why are you having so much fun? And, well, Setsuna's about to give her explanation, and that's where we left off. So, let's continue from here. As I looked up at the half clouds, half mist flowing by, Setsuna's voice reached my ears, and I returned my eyes to their usual level. There, a few steps ahead of me, beneath the brightening sky where she had stood with her back facing me, she smoothly turned round to face me directly. Suddenly, she looked ephemeral somehow, like she might simply vanish beyond the mist. Assailed by that anxiety, I stood gazing at her, awaiting her next word, allowing myself to be drawn in. I wonder whether you remember that night at the park. Huh? What left her lips was a sudden question with no logical tie to anything we'd been talking about. I mean, there is one, you just don't see it yet. As I stood there, too bewildered by her words to do anything, Setsuna's face softened just the tiniest bit, and she spoke again. It was when we were in college. I wanted to get your attention, so I forced myself to go to that party with the medical students, missed the last train. Her words began to lay bare a scene that had been buried in the sands of my memory. Now that the cue had been taken, the rest was automatic. Ah. Oh yeah, how could you bury that important memory? That is, well, I guess to the players that's important because it's a pivotal part of the story, but maybe to a human being there are other things that might override it. Memorize what I'm about to say to you. This afternoon, you and I took a train out of town to the Takahata Art Gallery in Hakone. Of course. It was that flimsy excuse I had cobbled together on the spot in the park, trying to figure out how to see Setsuna home after she had missed her curfew. A very sad night. Takaya, Io, and I had split up to pursue her in the bar district that night. Excuse you, don't forget about, Koharu. But even though we had run into each other in the end, the distance between us remained. In fact, the wounds had only opened further. It's strange. I've completely forgotten who I saw at that party or what I talked about, but my conversation with you afterward has stayed firmly in my mind all these years. Ah. After Setsuna thoughtfully strung these words together, one by one, I nodded quietly. It was the same for me. What do you mean same for you? You literally a few sentences ago were like, oh yeah, I had buried that in my memory. Oy vey, Haruki. Setsuna's face at that moment, her piercing voice, the emotions I bore pricking sharply at my chest. Most of the time, they were buried deep within my heart, but now and then they showed themselves this way, bringing that night vividly back to replay before my eyes. I didn't especially want to remember it, but I suppose it was a scene I ought not to turn my eyes from. But sometimes, as painful as the past is, remembering it and then moving on, like now, like they are at the art gallery, they're kind of overriding that pain. Like she had wanted to go to the art gallery, he made up the beautiful lie. Now they're making it a truth. So in that sense, remembering the past, yeah, it's still like painful, it's bittersweet. But realizing that the present is so much better now is almost like a type of healing, I think personally. Some things, yeah, leave them in the past, never think about them again. But this was kind of a minor heartache moment, so it's good to overwrite that. After all, it wasn't some illusion, but rather a crucial, precious piece of me as I was now. And most likely, Setsuna as well. But why? A question struck me, and I voiced it just as it was. Sure, it was a part of the past that ought not to be forgotten, for me especially. But the fact was that it was a painful memory. I couldn't help thinking there was no need to make a show of it like that, bringing it out beneath the light of day. That, too, was a fact. Which is true. This is one of my criticisms of Setsuna. She is constantly bringing up the painful past during the worst moments. Like, please, you need to move on. You need to move past it. The fact that Haruki kept making mistakes over and over again doesn't help that. But some things do need to stay in the past. And I knew Setsuna must feel the same way. So why? I put that confusion into everything I could put it into. My face, my voice, eyes, bearing to ask her. But I could tell that she had seen through my doubts, just as she had seen through my bewilderment a moment before. And her face and manner remained the same as she took in my words and nodded slightly. Because I didn't want any ill feeling to be left between us. Because everything painful that happened long ago has turned into a happy memory for me. And I wanted to make sure you knew that. But that sentence kind of makes me want to cry. Like, I disagree to a point. Like, yes, painful things you don't have to make them happy. You don't have to try to view the past with rose-colored lenses, whatever. Painful things are painful things. But the fact that she wants to move on. She wants to realize, like, yes, painful things happened, but they led me to this moment, and this moment makes me happy. That's a mature way of looking at it. That's a really beautiful sentiment to have. An unintended reaction pushed its way past my lips, but with the look on her face and the sound of her voice, I found myself unable to say anything else. To that same extent, her voice was filled with feeling and wholly unfaltering. Everything that we used to tiptoe around is far in the past now. I wanted you to be sure of that. Setsuna. She said the same thing once again, just with different wording. Oh, this is so good. This is so good. You know what? And part of this is really good. All right, I'm going to make a similar point. Say that you had an ex who really, really liked a certain game, okay? And you liked that game too. But for years, you couldn't play that game because it reminded you of your ex, right? Common story. Then you move on with your life. You find someone new. Eventually, it's good to find the courage to revisit that game and enjoy that game. And then you can make new memories with a new person. And it's hard to explain, but I'm pretty sure you know what I mean. And this is what Setsuna is trying to say as well, and it's with the same person rather than two separate people. But sometimes you just gotta make happy memories doing the same thing that was a little bit painful. Not always, but sometimes. Now, on the opposite end was during Kazusa Normal when they revisited the hot springs. Now, that is overwriting a happy memory, or bittersweet, with a sad-ish memory. That is not the kind of thing I'm talking about. That was a stupid decision. I hated that. I'm talking about true happiness, truly experiencing something good, not trying to overwrite the past, which the past was good. So, anyway, I could write an essay on it, but we'll move on. Surely she couldn't have made up her mind that cleanly regarding everything. Absolutely everything. And yet, there was a strength in her words that made me want to believe them at face value. Do you think I'm being unreasonable, Haruki-kun? Well, a little. I let my gaze roam for a second, searching for the words. Then lightly, very lightly, I nodded my head. One could say it was a rather blunt answer. But being at the point where we were, discussing what we were discussing, there was no need whatsoever for reserve nor for varnished, surface-level replies. The time when we were such strangers to each other was long past. We were about to become part of the same family after all. But if I were you, I think I would have done the same thing. Another moment, then a nod, and I began to speak more clearly. It's not easy to talk about something like this without finding the right opportunity. But in the end, if you don't say it, your partner will never know or be able to understand. Right? And I felt like the longer I put it off, the worse this unresolved feeling would become. So I thought, this might be the right time to tell you. Well, maybe. Too many words were flying through my brain, things that might slip in between Setsuna's words, so I didn't commit to anything, just smiled awkwardly. After all, the one who had caused her to feel such things, driven her to the point that she had to do this, was none other than me. But I don't think we needed to come all the way out to Hakone on a rainy day, specifically, just for that. Disagree. You're having a happy memory at that art gallery specifically, and now it's become a good place for the two of you, rather than a painful place for the two of you. So I agree with her decision to take him here. That said, neither Setsuna nor I had the intention at this point of making accusations. After looking once more at our deserted surroundings, wry smile still on my face, I returned my eyes to Setsuna and murmured my answer. Maybe pointing that out was too formulaic a move, but I couldn't keep from saying it. I won't say I didn't think of that. And as though Setsuna had anticipated just that, she took in my words, and an oddly proud smile came to her profile, together with an air of importance in her tone. In that look, I could sense the aura that always made me realize I could not win, and my smile became wryer still. It would seem that Setsuna was destined to remain on top today. But this way, we could make it a commemoration, and I was sure that no matter how much time passed, you would remember it. I had never really considered myself the forgetful type, but that probably wasn't what Setsuna was trying to say. What she meant was that this way, until the distant future, that is, even after 10 or 20 years, I wouldn't end up forgetting it completely, because we could both talk about it openly. This is good. Honest, open communication. I felt a little embarrassed, or maybe awkward about this, but just as I was finding myself falling into a complicated state of mind, silently visualizing this distant future, I noticed Setsuna peering into my face. I feel like here, now, I can do this to you. Huh? Oh. With Setsuna blushing slightly before me, I found myself saying something, then frantically rethinking my position of a few seconds before, but apparently there had been some other reason. And the moment I'd said it, Setsuna walked around behind me, leaning against my back. So it wasn't just for that. She had laid her face against me so that I could feel her hands, her nose, her sighs. Her voice, slightly muffled, was the happiest I had heard it sound today. Oh, the little cuddles. It's a little embarrassing, though, if someone had walked by and been like, oh, there's just a couple, cuddling on the ground over there. That's a little bit weird. Meanwhile, I could feel my earlobes going red, and I was unable to find a single word of reply to this sudden contact. So I just listened to Setsuna speaking and breathing. It may have been the rainy season, but the air here in the mountains was still chilly, and Setsuna's body, leaning against my back, was nothing but warm. Above all, this action was more than sufficient to remind me of that moment on the rooftop at the airport. Yes, I was no match for Setsuna today. See, that's a memory that's, if I were to put it to a vote, I would say not great to bring that up. Oh, remember that time on the rooftop when you watched Godzilla fly away and I held your back? No. Don't. Ugh. I hate that. Setsuna? Yes? Thank you. That's my line. That day, I had stood with my eyes fixed on the lead-colored sky, without even the slightest movement. This time, my eyes were on the emerald green grass at my feet. Because he's well grounded now, I murmured, lowering my voice in my embarrassment, such that it would reach Setsuna alone, and a happy whisper came from behind me. And I'm sorry for causing us so many detours and demanding so much of your attention. Everything she had done up until we finally swore our futures to one another. The fact that she had brought us here deliberately today. And the fact that she had deliberately told me, in as many words, that everything was okay now. Because I made her feel like she had to. I tried to imbue my words with the gratitude I felt in so many different senses. Probably, when I thought back on this later, I would inevitably blush. But, as had been the case with our conversation just now, if I didn't seize this opportunity, it would be almost impossible to find the words later. No. It's because you granted my wish. Even though there were painful times, I'm happy now. It's all right. I promise. As though she had understood, Setsuna took in my words and returned the feelings in words of her own. Oh, it's all right, I promise. Beautiful. Really, really nice. Open. There doesn't need to be a problem for you to reassure your partner like this. That's the thing. That's the thing that I think Haruki was struggling to grasp at first with this. This is so good, no matter how much time passes. Just reassuring someone that everything is good, that you're in love, that you're happy. This is really cute. I love this. Just as she had stayed close to me at the airport, when I stared motionlessly up at the sky, here she was now, close to me, warming me, caring for me. There was just one difference. Our feelings now were the precise opposite. So, wanting to respond to those feelings of hers, I reached behind myself, feeling around for her hand. When I found it, I wrapped my own hand around it and held it to my chest. Your heart is pounding like crazy, Haruki-kun. Setsuna moved her palm slightly over my chest, trying to feel my heartbeat more deeply. As I stood there, embarrassed and thoroughly at the mercy of this development, she murmured sweetly into my ear. That's probably because you're clinging to me, Setsuna. I endured this sudden, arguably cliched observation, calmed down briefly, and attempted to reply. But I couldn't stand being the passive one forever, and I took the initiative, grasping her hand tightly. Setsuna, come here. Okay. I pulled her by the arm, drawing her to me, and she gave herself over to me completely. The next moment, I had both arms wrapped tightly around her. Setsuna? Yes? I love you. Yes. Oh, so cute. Now I'm blushing. So adorable. Right by her ear, I buried my nose in her sweet-smelling hair, whispered how I truly felt, and embraced her. And, precisely as I had imagined, Setsuna gazed straight up at me. And I just want to note here, it's really, really interesting how things are written out in Japanese as opposed to English. This isn't a translation error or anything. This is just how it's actually written. Is the dialogue often comes before the dialogue description. If you read books written by, well, not in English, but like written by people whose native language is English, it's always the description that would come first. It would be, I whispered how I truly felt and embraced her. Setsuna, I love you. That's how it's usually written. But in Japanese, it's opposite. So it's a little bit different. And that just has to do with how their sentences are typically structured. But just something to note. Now that we had reached this point, there was only one thing left to do. The mist alone watched us, quietly, as our forms overlapped one another. This was our frame, wrapped in a veil of white. I would have been too embarrassed to do this in the middle of Onjuku, and it might be a bit inconvenient. But on this day, here in this scenic place with such a scant human presence, there was no real need for reserve. So I showed Setsuna my gratitude, as best I could, for bringing me here today. Aww. Nice kisses. And after we had spent this time that was all our own, we strolled quietly around the garden, hand in hand, letting our flushed faces cool down. Why don't we head back in? We can eat dinner before we leave, but if we dawdled... Okay, this is definitely not Setsuna, actually. Setsuna would not say the word dawdle. This is such an old man word. If we dawdle too much, we won't get home until late. Glancing at the clock tower that had just entered my field of vision, I noticed that it was later than I'd realized, and I spoke up. Even out in the mountains, the June sky was still bright, which had apparently thrown off my sense of time a little. Actually, even if we left immediately, it would be pretty late when we reached Suetsugu. Aw, really? I thought we could go ahead and miss the last train and let Dad lecture us later. I don't think that would be a good idea, Setsuna. It's so odd to me that she still lives with her parents and still has a curfew. Like, they're literally about to get married. It seems very childish, but to each their own. Every culture is different. While I worried, she was starting to get playful at my side, and I frantically put a stop to it. At times like this, had I been able to give a slightly more thoughtful answer on the spot, maybe I could have avoided being called a stick in the mud or something similar. Though I got the feeling that, in that case, it wouldn't have been what Setsuna was looking for. I'm kidding, silly. But apparently, it was nothing but a simple trick question. And before I could say anything else, Setsuna stuck out her tongue and gave a charming smile. I don't imagine you're at the stage now where you want Dad scolding you over little things, Haruki-kun. Nobody wants to be scolded by Setsuna's dad. He's scary. He's very scary. Setsuna's words weren't entirely wrong. I mean, my mood didn't turn negative just from setting foot in the Oiso house so much anymore. What do you mean anymore? It never has. Never ever. But still. But I couldn't come up with anything real to say immediately, so I trailed off. We had a wedding waiting in our near future, but as her boyfriend, I wasn't sure how to feel about her saying that so directly. I also wasn't sure how to feel about making her show that much consideration for me. Well, but the fact that we could speak so freely with each other was proof of what a solid relationship we had built, with no cracks. Nothing any other person could shake. Ugh, I hate that he has to note that, because that much should be a given. But for these two, you have to state that outright. Yes, I wanted to look at things positively so that I didn't let the feelings she had put into bringing me all the way out here today would go to waste. Setsuna? Yes? We should come back here. Maybe on a day with better weather next time. Yeah. I didn't know how many years down the line that next time would be, nor did I know whether it would just be me and Setsuna, or with new family members in tow. Oh, babies. That's so cute. What a cute thought. My God, what a cute thought. Being so close to marriage really like puts it in perspective. Like, oh my God, they're about to start a family. That's insane. But someday, like today, in this place, I would get lost in reminiscing with the one I loved once again. That was what I hoped. End. Oh, listen. This is so cute. So when you read, or at least this is my opinion, when I read the beginning of this story, I almost think it's a little bit boring, right? It's just a date and nothing is really happening. The thing about White Album 2 is like a roller coaster. There's always the conflict, the rising action, falling action, the emotions. The first half of this fic is really just kind of small talk, regular date with someone you love, not super interesting. But then the parallels between now and back, like Setsuna said that night in the park, that's a little bit scary to bring up. But then the way they kind of just smooth it over, and not even smooth it over, but use it as a crutch to make their relationship even better, right? They're using the horrible past to make their present better. That's pretty amazing. And I think that's really the takeaway here, is how much stronger they are now. I love that. That's wonderful. So this is the end. This is not the end of the doujinshi itself, but this is the end of the first short story. There's 2 actually included in the same book. So I will be back with the second story next time. Thank you so much for joining me on this doujinshi reading from White Album 2, and story number 2 coming up soon. Until then, hope you take care. See you.